Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Sophie Fuller, who serves as the program leader for the PG Diploma, MA, Muse, the Master of Fine Arts at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. I am so excited to have you on the show, Sophie. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, it's just so great. And I especially am so looking forward to, because you have such an extraordinary knowledge and experience and understanding of composers, and especially women composers. And I really want to kind of delve into that. But I thought first, just for our audience to kind of get a sense, can you just give us a sense of Trinity Laban for any of our audience who might not be familiar, and just kind of your role and what you're overseeing at Trinity Laban?
Sure, yeah. Well, Trinity Laban, take your pick, is a conservatoire of music and dance. And we're the only one in the UK, we're based in London, that combines both music and dance. We have a music faculty where I work and a dance faculty. We try and get as much collaboration between the two as we can, although they're in very kind of distinctive buildings. The dance faculty, Laban, is a brand new building, lots of glass and wood, and the music faculty is based in the old Royal Naval College, which dates back centuries. So it's got these kind of strange old staircases and a real feeling of history. But we actually, in the music faculty, I mean, throughout the whole of the institution, we're really aiming at experimentation, you know, pushing boundaries, helping our students to find their voices, to collaborate with all sorts of people. So there's all this kind of these new sounds coming out of this old building. So it's quite an extraordinary place, actually.
That's just absolutely extraordinary and amazing. And of course, I've loved to have been able to have the collaborations and history that I've been able to have in Sphinx over the years with Trinity Laban. And so that has been wonderful. So, you know, to really dive into it, right, there is a huge lack of representation in our field when it comes to composers. And I want to get into some of the work that you're doing there. But also, could you kind of just give us your sense of kind of what brought about your interest in composition and in looking at and experiencing women composers?
Well, my interest in, I've always been interested in all kinds of music. And as a child, I played the flute, I played the piano, I played in symphony orchestras. And I was always quite interested in finding music that people didn't know about. So I remember with a close friend of mine playing a piece for flute and oboe by Thea Musgrave, who of course is a very well-known Scottish, but based in the US, composer. And we really liked the fact that she was a woman. And this is, I'm talking back in the 70s now, and, you know, people were not generally playing a lot of music composed by women. So I was always interested in kind of pushing boundaries, pushing my own boundaries as well. I momentarily played in a jazz band. I wasn't very good at improvising, but, you know, I'm always interested in finding ways to move, you know, in that typical phrase, outside my comfort zone. But after having spent a lot of my childhood playing mostly classical, bit of jazz music, I then went off and studied Russian and spent a little bit of time in Moscow and did different things. But music pulled me back. And as a mature student, I did a music degree, and I got really interested in composition. But I felt, looking back, I'm not entirely sure whether it was more that I got grabbed by writing about, thinking about, exploring music, or whether I felt a bit disillusioned with what I felt were the possibilities for me as a composer. Not so much because I'm a woman, but because I felt it was the field of contemporary classical music was so small. It felt kind of, I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. But anyway, that's by and by. I realized that what I really wanted to do was to find out about neglected composers, neglected music. And for me, at first, that was women. And it really started, I was very interested, I'm always interested in kind of how music works in the community and how music works with politics. So I was interested in the 1930s and the composers who were engaged in political activism through their music at that time. So there's me working in the 1930s, and I started looking at the music that was being heard in London. And there was this wonderful concert series that was organised by 3 young women, primarily so that they could themselves be heard. So one was a conductor, one was a composer, one was a violinist, and they got all their friends involved, and their friends happened to be a lot of women. So it became this remarkable concert series where a lot of music by women was heard. And it's some of the composers have become very well known. People like Elizabeth McConkie, Grace Williams. They also heard early works by even better known composers like Benjamin Britten or Michael Tippett. So they were, in the 1930s this was a really, really kind of vibrant concert series that brought a lot of new music and also showcased a lot of women in a way that when I was doing this work in the kind of 1980s, you know, music by women wasn't being heard as much as it was in the 1930s in this series.
Wow.
Anyway, I then decided, I did a lot of my research about that when I was an undergraduate. I then decided I wanted to go on and study further. And I started just kind of going backwards. And I thought, hang on, what about the Victorian period? You know, there must have been women making music then. Long story short, I ended up doing a doctoral dissertation on Victorian women composers. But I think my abiding kind of passion for kind of making these neglected voices heard again was when I first heard Elizabeth McConkie's first string quartet, which was a work that was played at this concert series written in the 30s, and it's just so alive and vibrant. And I kind of sat back when I heard it and I thought, how come I don't know this? You know, I knew all about Benjamin Britten's string quartets and of course, you know, people like Mozart and Beethoven, but I didn't know anything about Elizabeth McConkie's string quartets, and she wrote them throughout her long career. She wrote a series of 13 string quartets, and they're amazing works.
Right.
So, sorry, that was a very long story, but that's kind of how I got interested.
Right. No, so this is fantastic and just extraordinary. And unfortunately, so many of people in our field aren't aware, right, of this rich history. And so now kind of bringing it a little bit institutionally, a lot of our audience are people who are, you know, at other institutions who are maybe frustrated about the lack of women composers in the work that they're doing, whether it be at music schools, conservatories, or presenters or orchestras. So you've got this initiative, Venus Blazing, and just wondering if you could share a little of that, and especially kind of sometimes, you know, people are like, well, we want to kind of do more, but they're maybe a little reticent to say, okay, you know, 20% of what we're going to do is going to be by underrepresented composers, et cetera. And you've got just an extraordinary goal and focus for Venus Blazing, and I'd love if you could share that with us. And especially knowing with some of our audience that they may really want to replicate or try to emulate what you're doing.
Well, Venus Blazing was actually an initiative that took place for one academic year from 18, I'm thinking back in Victorian terms, 2018 to 2019. And for that year, Trinity Laban as an institution made a commitment that all its music that was heard public facing, so all the music played by the large ensembles, programs that were heard in the local church, all that kind of work, we would commit to having 50% of that music. And that's 50% by duration of music heard, not just by names of composers, because quite a lot of people sneak in. They say, oh, we're going to do 50% because
Right.
we've got two women, but they've got two-minute pieces, you know, and then we've got a 40-minute symphony by a man. But so this was by duration. And so that was that commitment we made for that year. And it was remarkably successful. It wasn't always easy, and a lot of people did a lot of work to find repertoire. But I think the more we kind of did it, the more we kept finding stuff, and extraordinary things were dug up and performed. We did a Thea Musgrave opera, her Dickens opera, A Christmas Carol. That was the kind of big Trinity Laban opera for that year. We did all sorts of things. We took the name Venus Blazing from a violin concerto by one of our composition teachers, Deirdre Gribben. It's a wonderful work, and we played that, of course. She very kindly let us use the name. But it was just, we were searching around for what we could call this initiative, and we had all sorts of very bad ideas. And then this one, we all went, yes.
So I love this, and I think that so many people can look to Trinity Laban in terms of an example, because a lot of times we can be reticent to especially set such a high goal. Say, we're only performing, 1% or 2% of our works are by women composers, and now let's jump to 50%. But I love what you shared about the idea that because we set this bar, this threshold, it forced us to do research, to be pressured to explore works that otherwise we might not do if we were kind of like, let's just generally increase and pay attention to, the diversity of our composers. So I love that. So could you also kind of share, so in terms of coming out of that and thinking about that year-long initiative, has that changed now how you feel things will be permanently moving forward for Trinity Laban?
Well, we certainly hope so. I've always been really concerned about the legacy, the kind of going on, because I was aware that the danger, of course, was that you have this wonderful year and then everything goes back to normal, So what we've done is we've formed it's sort of a working group of mostly students, but myself and other members of staff as well. And we've called it Amplify because I certainly felt, and a lot of the students and colleagues felt, that we wanted to take it beyond just looking at women and look at all kinds of unheard voices. So we're looking at, composers of color, we're looking at composers with disabilities, we're looking at neurodivergent composers, we're looking at what different things composers of different sexualities, different genders, it's everything really. So we've called that group Amplify because that's what we want to do. We want to amplify the voices. And it's underpinning everything we do. We haven't set percentages again, but we're doing things like we're making sure that every time someone proposes a project or an event, the kind of form filling exercise, and that form will ask them to explain the ways in which they've thought about diversity and inclusion. If you want to put on a Beethoven festival, what else can you do within that Beethoven festival that will show things beyond the male white canon? So we're quietly confident. I think one of the important things is that it becomes as easy as possible for people to find this music, to be able to listen to what recordings there are, to find scores, if it's notated music, to find people they can work with. So one of the things we're doing is developing a website where we're going to not reinvent the wheel, but kind of use it as a hub for all the different kind of resources that exist all over the world, actually. There are all sorts of people putting together really useful kind of databases and lists and things. Right. But that seems to be one of the key things, is to help people find find things for themselves.
Right. Awesome. Well, this is just extraordinary work. And I think we all have so much to learn and so much that we can emulate. So unfortunately, we're just about out of time. But, you know, here on Arts Engines, I always like to get to kind of the personal heart of our arts leaders that we have on the show. And so just wondering, right, these types of initiatives, this type of work and researching, and sometimes, you know, having to work with different constituencies, things must get challenging sometimes, I'm sure, during the pandemic and all of that. And just wondering, where do you find, or what do you do to get your sources of strength, of inspiration, especially during the most challenging of times?
I think I look to other women usually, actually. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about where I get my inspiration from, and it does tend to be women. It tends to be women who have fight or have fought to make their voices heard. So a singer-songwriter I always find hugely inspirational is Ani DeFranco. If we move away from music, and words are always really important to me. So someone like Kay Tempest, the non-binary spoken word artist, I find her work extraordinary. I love the way she brings politics and communication into everything she does. Someone like Maya Angelou is endlessly inspirational. You know, so many of her words are just, you know, they're just perfect for, you know, I put them up on the fridge, you know, and look at them and think, yes, okay.
For sure. Well, Sophie Fuller, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Mm-hmm.